My guest today's work has literally been used as the benchmark, as the staple in criminal investigative courses all around the world. You're definitely not going to want to miss this one. Court's in session. You're on the stand with me, Brian Lass. Roll the intro. And welcome once again. You are on the stand with me, Brian Lass, and I'll tell you, it is not very often I get to use the term law enforcement rock star, but undoubtedly my A-lister guest today only asked for such example. Of course, the notoriety that goes along with 12 years ago, I believe it was now, when the world watched literally in shock and awe and plausibly horror, as the infamous Colonel Russell Williams admitted. And that admission, that confession at the helm of Master Interrogator, my guest here today, a retired Superintendent of the Ontario Provincial Police, the one and only, my policing hero, Jim Smyth, is here today. And Jim, I thank you so very kindly for being here.
Well, thanks very much, Brian. I hope I don't have to pay you for every superlative you say today, because I'll be a very poor man by the end of it. But appreciate the compliments. But whether it's rock star or whatever term people use, I think what I want to focus on today is even when you look at a rock star up on stage, really what makes them a rock star is everybody who's behind that stage and everybody who's doing the work behind it. So I always like to say that you can't have a good interview without a great investigation, and certainly that was the case in Williams. So happy to chat about it.
Absolutely. And all the more, obviously, exuding your leadership skills, and undoubtedly why you rose to the rank of superintendent, as for such example, some of the things I'm pretty sure we'll get into here today. And, one quick question that comes to mind, I mean, we're talking about, notoriety and literally the Williams interrogation, as for such example, being really the benchmark for criminal investigative, interviewing and interrogation training all around the world. The notoriety that's come along with that, this almost, celebrity status, if you will, is this something that's become normal now? Is it still kind of weird for you, or?
Oh, it'll always be weird for me. Somebody once said to me that it doesn't matter what I did in my career, I'll always be known as the person who interviewed Williams, and that's certainly proven to be true. It's obviously it's an interview that did grab a lot of attention. It's taught in a lot of different places, but it's obviously an investigative team I was very proud to be part of, for sure.
Excellent. Well, I'll tell you for certain, for me, and I know undoubtedly for many watching, certainly as far as your coming of age, your journey, literally from inception of even deciding to get into the policing world, that's something undoubtedly I'm curious about, and for others who want to follow suit to get eventually into major case investigations and all the like. So maybe if we can, I guess chronologically anyway, start where this twinkle in the eye for Jim Smyth was to even make you decide to get into the policing world.
Well, I mean, the way I got into policing, I think probably had a lot to do with my father. He was a police officer. It's a story that we see quite often. Sure. As somebody who I've always been proud of as my dad is, and I really enjoyed seeing how his career went. And it was a pretty easy choice for me to try and follow in his footsteps, and that's what I ended up doing.
Excellent. Now, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe where you first got into policing was York Regional Police. That was the first service, I believe, unless I stand corrected, that you started out with?
That's right. Yep. That was my first of two. Very proud to say I was with York Regional Police for 10 years. They really led me down the path into criminal investigations, and I'm always been grateful to that police service for the training I got there.
Absolutely. And then undoubtedly, of course, continuing on for a very celebrated, long-standing career with the OPP. One of the things I'm somewhat curious about, and maybe honing more in on obviously your path towards, eventually taking you to the world of investigations, major case investigations and all the like. And I guess it would have stemmed plausibly from in and around the time you were with YRP, as the whole Paul Bernardo scenario was unfolding. I'm just curious if maybe this part of the equation was something that had any influence for you to want to stem down the realm of, investigating these types of matters, as for such example.
Well, essentially, I think my start into forensic interviewing focus was my first investigative unit back in '93, I believe it was. York Regional Police started a child abuse and sexual assault unit. So I spent about 4 years focusing on child sexual assault investigations. And if you step back and think about how a typical child sexual assault allegation comes forward, quite often it's a child comes forward sometimes months, even years after incidents have occurred. They provide a version of events, and they quite often know who the suspect was. But other than what the child has to say, we don't have any other evidence. There's rarely any forensic evidence or video evidence or anything like that to corroborate things. So we're essentially left with what the child has told us. And if they're a young child at the time, quite often their version can be somewhat confusing because they only know what they know. And so the other option we have is to speak to the person who has been accused and to try and generate a situation where they're going to be willing to talk to us and tell us the truth about whether they were involved or not. So those 4 years were very heavily focused on enhancing our forensic interviewing skills. York was very supportive of our unit and getting us the proper training. And I think that's what kind of launched me down the road of focusing on violent crime and specifically on forensic interviewing.
Interesting. And then undoubtedly, of course, with the OPP, I know you held a lot of prominent positions within the major investigative teams there. Maybe you can walk us through a little bit sort of how that journey with just some of the roles you held in some of the units there with OPP up until retirement, for that matter.
Sure. I moved over to the OPP in 1997. Shortly after that, I moved into their major crime investigation roles. And in 2000, I was given an opportunity by then Superintendent Kate Lyons, who was the OPP's first trained criminal profiler. She was trained by the FBI to come in and work as an understudy in their criminal profiling program in our behavioral sciences section. So I went through a very lengthy period of study, spent a lot of time working with the FBI and a number of state police agencies and taking a number of courses, resulting in my certification as a criminal profiler in 2003, I believe, and focused on that area until around 2006, where I was given an opportunity to go to the Canadian Police College and be trained as a polygraph examiner and forensic interviewer. So what that allowed me to do is basically combine those two disciplines to support investigations all across the province. And it was a very impactful time in my career and something I'll always remember. Well, after I finished with our forensic interviewing unit, I moved into major case management roles with our criminal investigation branch, who were doing homicides, violent crimes. And then I spent some time with our Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau. And then that resulted in a promotion to superintendent. So my last 5 years of my career was in the OPP Central Region as our director of operations. So Central Region has about 1,000 members, officers and support staff, civilians. So a large region, a lot going on, a very challenging role, and a role that I was very proud to retire from.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what, that certainly brings us at least somewhat more to the present day. And I know you're very proud, and I'm very excited to have heard about one of your most recent endeavors, or perhaps the most recent being that of Integrity Interviewing for Investigators. As I understand it, this is sort of your flagship Jim Smyth, if you will, training. And I'm sure there's many people lining up to say, hey, I'm a student of Jim Smyth. I know for sure I'd love to put that on a resume. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about, the history of the organization, how it came to be, just, the influence, inception, and everything that comes along with it. Peel back some of the layers here.
Well, we launched it about a week ago, Brian, so I can tell you that the ink on the business cards is still a little bit wet.
All right.
Very excited about it. I can tell you that I think really what influenced me to start that company was, I guess the best way to describe it is I was really influenced by my first 5 years as a police officer and my last 5. My first 5 is when I really got into that child abuse, sexual assault investigative role, got some very valuable interview training. And I know that when I received that training, that really influenced my career for the better. And then my last 5 years, obviously, was managing all those new officers coming into detachments in Central Ontario, seeing how eager they were, how much they wanted to get trained and to be good at their jobs. And really what we're facing in Canada right now, and I think worldwide, is we're looking to hire as many officers as possible. And when we go through the issues everybody had with COVID, with delays in training, the backlog to get officers some significantly good forensic interview training is just getting greater. So I wanted to put something out there that would allow officers in the early part of their career to access some valuable training before they get a chance to go on some of the really good courses that places like the Canadian Police College, Ontario Police College offer. I know those instructors personally, and their courses are second to none. This isn't to compete with those courses, but it's to give the officers a chance to augment their training before they might get an opportunity, maybe 5-10 years into the job, to get that kind of training from their own police service.
Well, I can tell you, as for such example, having not that long ago done the criminal investigator training program through the Ontario Police College, guess what the benchmark fixture was for their interrogation component? It was the Jim Smyth interrogation for Russell Williams. So, all the more. But maybe I can ask you this, because I'm certainly curious, and I know many people as well. Just the idea that here you are offering this fantastic training, which again of the utmost intrigue, and maybe to get a little better of an idea how the training has been sort of formulated and what it may consist of. But one thing I'm curious about, because we've used, at least even somewhat in our short time here together thus far, the terms interviewing and interrogation. I mean, can we make a distinction between the two in the investigative capacity? I know undoubtedly there must be, but sometimes we tend to cross borders with the two. So maybe I can get your take on that.
Yeah, the whole issue of the word interrogation has become a bit controversial in the last couple of years. I can tell you, I was working over in England recently, and they don't use the word at all. And really, the way I define the difference between an interview and interrogation, an interview is simply asking somebody to tell you what they saw, what they heard, what they know. An interrogation, it becomes a little more direct, where you're essentially telling the person, we know you've done something and we'd like you to tell us the truth about it. It doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be coercive. But again, the issue of the word interrogation can sometimes be off-putting to people, especially when, it's linked to things like, waterboarding in Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
Certainly nothing like that's happening in a Canadian police interview room, but it influences people's view of the word for sure. Yeah.
And just that idea of, the idea of sitting down saying, hey, we know you've done it, taking a bit, maybe not to use the term aggressive, but this almost indicative of, I know, of course, there's different methodologies for this. I mean, the infamous, if you will, Reed method, and obviously the peace methodology. I can tell you, for such example, I did the Reed certification out of sheer curiosity not that long ago, and I proudly posted my certificate on LinkedIn, only to be met with much dismay from many of our Canadian colleagues here. So I know there's different takes, and maybe present day, at least in Canada, Reed not necessarily the most legally of sound methodologies, and plausibly this having to do with obviously the precedent in RV Oikle from 2000, things of that nature. So I'm not sure what your take is for Reed versus the peace methodology, what the present sort of staple is, and maybe even coming full circle to what methodology, if any, you're honing in on it in your actual training that you offer through the integrity interviewing for investigators.
Yeah, I mean, I know people talk about the Reed technique, and I'm in the same boat as you, Brian. I took the basic and advanced Reed courses 25 years ago because that's what we did. That's what we were sent to by our police services. I was asked to instruct on the Reed technique for years. But I can tell you, probably, I would say starting around 2005, there was a number of things happening. We were starting to see some really credible research that pointed to some of the things that Reed's taught as being responsible for false confessions, especially research coming out of the United States.
Sure.
And we were getting challenged by defense counsel in court when we were testifying about statement admissibility, about using the Reed technique, and arguments were being made to judges that the Reed technique was too risky. So I'm not aware of any court decision that says thou shalt not use the Reed technique.
Sure.
But we certainly saw the writing on the wall. We listened to the researchers, judges, defense counsel, and we made adjustments. And I think what you see probably with the Williams interview is sort of the end result of how we progressed from using a pure Reed technique to more of a rapport-based approach. And essentially that's what we talk about with integrity interviewing is let's get the focus away from getting a confession from somebody to let's just get them to be willing to talk to us and hopefully to tell us the truth.
Tell the truth.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
really, I mean, you don't have to go too far to find a prosecutor that will tell you that a statement that has one provable lie in it is often far more valuable to the prosecution than a full confession. So the goal is to create a situation or set the stage for somebody to be willing to talk to us and do it voluntarily.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned about, basically seeking the truth or investigator. Ultimately, that's what you're doing. And I'll tell you, just in the interest of sharing and interjecting a bit of humor here, again, that CIT course was instructed by Blake Eastoe, a retired homicide detective from Hamilton. And he posed a question, ultimately, what are we trying to accomplish in an interview? Of course, Brian Lass with his three-piece suit, ex-prosecutor. We're seeking to comprise the relevant and material evidence for the Crown to prove a prima facie. I give like this big, he's like, okay, how about just we're seeking the truth? And I was very politely corrected, and that will always live with me, and absolutely, 100%. You hit the nail on the head with that. But with that being said, and the idea of, in this case, talking more from the format of an investigative interview, someone in the room with you, and certainly the training that you've put together as part of your package here with Integrity Interviewing. Has it been constructed in any sort of a methodological way as far as how you put your mind to wanting to take a student, through topic to topic? Maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview, kind of the curriculum, if you will.
Yeah, what we try and do, so we have a couple of options for people. The one option, it's pretty interesting and not an option that I would have really even considered even a year or two ago. I don't think I would ever be seen as somebody who is an online training proponent, but certainly when we talk to some of the more prominent educators out there, and we look at how people are living their lives now, the appeal of somebody being able to watch short modules and do a little bit of homework and then get the next module is certainly a very valid way for people to learn now. And that's what we've set up is it's an online course. Broken into 7 different modules that walk you through the different stages of an interview, from the first step of making sure you have a solid team that can support you and you can support them and you have options, right to the end where if you do receive a confession, how to talk to that person to confirm the confession. So each module is released once a week. They're about 20 minutes long, and there's some homework assignments between each one. And then the students have access to an online community that can support them throughout the 7 weeks. So that's one option. And then the other option is obviously the more traditional, which is companies or police services can reach out to us and we can sit down with them and find out what their needs are and then customize training for those needs.
Fantastic. And for the benefit of everyone watching, undoubtedly there'll be a link slathered all over the all the posts that go along with this video. So we'll make sure we redirect everyone to the page here. So that's fantastic. I know when I stumbled upon that, it was the utmost of intrigue. I'm sure. And again, just to full circle, and I probably reiterated many times, they only ask for such example, the Williams interrogation or interview for that matter, certainly the benchmark, and perhaps to learn some of the skills or tactics that went into that, even the mindset, undoubtedly, I know probably have the utmost of intrigue. So that link will be posted, absolutely. And with that being said, and perhaps as a segue, and I'm presumptively a lot of people probably tuning in to hear somewhat about this infamous, I guess at this point, Russell Williams interrogation. And undoubtedly many of us in the law enforcement policing community, we watched the video, we've gone on YouTube, we've seen it all over the news, but perhaps to peer into the mind, ergo you, the person actually there approaching this and some of the maybe thought process or things that were going through your mind when this was happening. And undoubtedly, still many years later, this is probably still somewhat of a sensitive topic and things we can and cannot talk about. So be mindful of that. But, maybe again, speaking chronologically, enter into the room with Williams. I mean, what is some of the things that maybe you're setting yourself up for as far as your mindset and approach right from the onset?
Well, I think we need to step back a little bit and think about what was going on before either Williams or I stepped in the room. Certainly, there's no shortage of information out there, whether it's books or YouTube videos or some of the news shows that have talked about Williams and have had various experts on there giving their opinions. So there's no shortage of people to go, or information out there for people to go on places like YouTube and watch that interview and watch different people's opinions. I think probably what's more informative is for people to understand what was actually happening before the interview and what's happening.
The preamble, how you got there, absolutely. That's one thing I'm curious about. I didn't want to pry, but since you opened the door, I guess it's open to explore now.
Well, I go back to what I said a few minutes ago, Brian. Is that you don't get a good interview without a great investigation, and certainly that was the case with Williams. Chris Nicholas was the what we refer to as a multi-jurisdictional major case manager on that case. He'd only been assigned that case 4 days before Williams was stopped on a roadside check. And as soon as they had that conversation with him and they could see that he had some sort of geographic relevance to all 4 of the cases we were interested in, and he had the right make and model of tires on his truck, thousands of other people did as well, but certainly it was reason to consider him. It was really Chris and his team that sat down actually all through the night and looked at the assessment of him as a potential suspect. You can see certainly there would have been a lot of discussion about, well, it's not possible. He's the commander of our largest Air Force base in the country. He's not a serial killer. But then again, you're looking at the connection to the victims geographically and the make and model. It certainly meant that they had to pursue that lead. They had other leads they were looking at as well, but I give full credit to Chris and his team for prioritizing Russell Williams as a suspect. And then the second thing they did, which I thought was very significant, was I was called in that Friday morning, so he stopped on a Thursday night. I was asked to go down and assist him as a forensic interviewer on the Friday morning. I can tell you when I first got there, the thought process was we were going to probably interview him that afternoon. But again, Chris and his team very carefully assessed their options and made a very critical decision, which was they were going to slow everything down a little bit. And they were going to apply for search warrants for his home and his cottage and his vehicle, actually. So I can tell you from looking at the information we had about him, the grounds were pretty thin for search warrants. But they made the decision to try anyway, and it turned out to be an excellent decision because the judge did agree with them that we had the grounds. Excellent. And it was only after those search warrants were signed that we decided to call him on the Sunday afternoon and ask him to come in. And if anybody has watched the clips that are available on YouTube and the clips that were released by the judge at a sentencing hearing, sure. It's pretty apparent that those search warrants were highly impactful to his decision to tell us the truth. We didn't know it when we showed him the search warrants in the interview, but he certainly knew that whether he talked to us or not, whether he confessed or not, the investigators were going to find some very incriminating evidence in his house. And the second thing I think really is important for people to understand is it's easy to forget that when you're looking at two people talk in a room, that it's not just the two people. There was three extremely experienced, skillful people outside that room that night. Any one of them could have stepped into my shoes and done that job. And really, those are the people that I relied upon. It's not really clear in the clips on YouTube, but I step out quite often and we consult and we strategize, and I go in and I execute the plan that we all agree is the best route forward. So it's not just me coming up with ideas. I'm relying on the input of a lot of people to make that interview progress the way it did.
Sure, and it's interesting you say that. And again, to interject some humor here, I've heard stories as, for such example, someone's in the room doing the interview, you have the eyes and ears outside, and you almost hit a dead wall, and you go and confer with the people on the other side of the window, like, what am I forgetting? Ask him if he did it. Did you do it? Oh yeah, I did it. And then he tells you everything, right? So you hear stories like that. Not exactly to say that that's of course how things went there, but absolutely that certainly greatly sets the stage, or at least the preamble to how you arrived there. And it's interesting you talk about, well, for one thing, the search warrants and the idea of major case management obviously pays to have a very good affiant, a skilled affiant, someone there to be dealing solely, as for such example, with the search warrants. But as far as the exculpatory evidence going into this, and the tire prints, the fact he was in a vehicle, and I think even one officer, local officer, may have recalled seeing a similar vehicle parked at the house at the time. But it's interesting you say that, because when you start going down the realm of tire prints, or even asking for his boot prints, one of the things as far as body language, we all see him literally look right down at the very boots that he was wearing that night and having that uh-oh moment. So even from the body language perspective, and I'm curious, is that something that you might have noted when he did that? Is that something that happened in the room, that a light bulb went off for you, or?
No. I noticed that when I watched the video again. I didn't notice it when it was happening. And we get asked quite a bit about how body language influences our approach to interviews. And maybe there's a lot smarter people than me that do forensic interviewing, but I feel personally, I don't have the ability to make objective observations of body language and focus on what they're saying and focus on what I need to say and remember the details. Sure. So I think it's very difficult when you're in the middle of an interview to put any weight on any kind of body language. Certainly after the fact, or the monitors outside the room. They often pick up on things that I don't pick up on. And that's what makes those consultations so valuable, is that they will tell me things that they saw that they think we should delve into further. based on their observations, nothing that I saw.
Absolutely. And again, to come full circle with Reed, they talk about closing off your body language or self-soothing, rubbing your neck and scratching. And you do start to see a lot of that as the interview progresses, right? So it's actually kind of interesting for certain from that perspective. Now, again, just the idea that, here you are now, we have a little bit of the context for how you arrive in the room with Williams there. And maybe before we even talk about rapport building or any strategies like that, and I did allude earlier on, and the legal nerd in me is going to come out a little bit here, Jim, but and you were undoubtedly in the thick of it, of your career in the year 2000. I gave homage to the case R.V. Oikel, which sort of, I guess, set precedent for this four-pronged test, or the test for voluntariness. So should someone, make a confession, admission of guilt, they want to challenge it, it goes to a voir dire. Have we met, the fact that there was no threats or promises, oppression, trickery, that whole song and dance. So I'm kind of curious, and again, you did use such language at the beginning of your interview with Williams. I'm a person perceived an authority, and you're really setting the stage. But as far as really ensuring that you've met, perhaps as any internal checklist, if I can word it that way, that you've met the satisfaction for, should this be, come down to any test of voluntariness? Is there something, perhaps as far as an internal checklist, or something you go off, or is it just kind of go with the flow?
Not going with the flow, that's for sure. I mean, really, when you look at the segment of the interview where we're talking about his rights and what he needs to do and doesn't need to do, those are things that I've repeated hundreds and hundreds of times. Sure. So most of the time I have a mental checklist that I've covered all the bases that we're required to cover. But again, that's the value of having experienced monitors outside the room. Their job is, if I go through his rights to counsel and I forget to ask him if he wants to call a lawyer, which is a significant part of right to counsel, their job's to knock on the door before I go any further and call me out and say, hey, we missed a part and we need to cover that off. And I always caution younger officers, because like you say, that interview is shown in our academy as well. And
sure.
One of my concerns about that is that you don't ever see me reading the card to him. And I always caution younger officers that that's always going to be your fallback. You can have a conversation with somebody about their rights, but you should always go back to that card in the end, because that's what's going to make sure you've covered all the bases and you're not going to forget something.
Absolutely. And that, you actually brought up an interesting point that admittedly I somewhat left to the side here, that maybe I'll circle back quickly. And again, just speaking to, perhaps a curriculum with integrity interviewing and things of this nature, and maybe an inspiration for some of the training in there. Throughout your immaculate careers, the many years you've been doing what you're doing, have you noted, and you mentioned one just such example there, but are there any perhaps other reoccurring themes that you think maybe are, I don't want to say items of contention, but items for sure that maybe younger or even seasoned officers really want to hone in to button up? Maybe anything that you feel is of somewhat of oversight, or something we could definitely improve on in the investigator world?
Well, I think one of the more important things, and going back to people's rights, I think when officers join the police service, their perception of how police conduct interviews is the same. They get from the same place as everybody else. They've watched movies, TV, and I think it's a common perception out there that the police always try and provide the rights in a way that they can move around the person calling a lawyer, or exerting their right to remain silent. So there's an inference there that that's something we should do. We should try and manipulate their rights to try and get them not to use their rights. When in fact, there's sound research now that says the opposite is true. Is the more forthright we are, and the earlier we provide them with the rights, the more likely they are to say, thank you for providing me with my rights, and I'm going to decide to talk to you anyway. And they're going to make an informed decision to continue speaking to you. So it's an important lesson. It's, not only do we want officers to make sure that they're providing people with their rights, because, that's where the name integrity interviewing comes from in my mind, is that really the training is to allow officers to present themselves in a way in an interview setting that allows them to demonstrate their own integrity. So when they're in court trying to have a statement admitted, the judge can see that the officer really did truthfully care for the person's rights and respected them.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you say that, because speaking for sure for Williams, and this is something undoubtedly everyone noted, you're speaking to integrity, this calm, very almost empathetic demeanor that you masterfully display from start to finish. Is this something that you switch on, that you're cognizantly doing? Does it have to do with rapport building? Maybe talk us through somewhat of the considerations for demeanor and how that may turn into the idea of trying to build rapport with the person.
Well, a lot of times I get asked about how nervous I was when this interview started, and I can honestly tell you that I I wasn't really that nervous. And the reason I wasn't that nervous is because going back to the preparation that occurred, I knew that the investigation was ready to execute search warrants at Russell Williams' house. If he refused to come and talk to us, if he walked out of the interview room, there was a solid backup plan. And so when you have that knowledge, the pressure to get the confession, so to speak, is off of you. Your
Sure.
job is just to simply treat the person properly, treat them with respect, make sure they understand what their rights are and make an informed decision, and then to try and get them to tell you the truth about what they did and what they didn't do. So it's not like you often see on TV where you're walking into an interview room and your bosses are outside saying, if we don't get a confession from this guy, the whole case is
Yeah.
done. That's very rarely the case. Russell Williams was getting arrested that night, regardless of what he said to me.
And that's an interesting take. Obviously, one of the things we don't necessarily get to know or understand just by watching the video proper, the video on its face. But now, with that being said, and just the idea of either way he's getting arrested and everything's kind of pointing towards him, I know speaking for myself, many people undoubtedly who watch us, plausibly for us, I guess the light bulb or spark moment was when he very callously says, "Get a map." I think to many of us was, okay, this is the point where he's basically admitted it. Is that kind of your thought process? Is that what was going on through your head? I'm curious when he said, "Get a map," what may have been racing through your brain at the time.
Well, it's interesting how we all cope with things. I remember when he said that, my first reaction was one of actually a bit of disappointment, because I think personally I was holding out a little bit of hope. I know it was unreasonable hope based on statistics and what we know happens to victims, but we knew Jessica Lloyd had left her home alive. She'd walked out of her own power 9 days before that interview. So there was always that hope that somehow she was being held somewhere. So when he talked about getting a map, and then the short follow-up conversation to that where he's talking about a location in a forest, it really drove home the point that we weren't going to be able to bring Jessica home alive.
Sure.
But of course, the other side of that was we now knew that he was the person responsible, and we could move forward on that basis.
I gotcha. And one other thing I'd be hard pressed not to ask about, if nothing for my own curiosity. And with that, with you sharing with us what's going through your mind and this almost heinous reality of what we're now dealing with, so to speak. And, another pinnacle moment, I think, for many people watching is, very shortly thereafter, you actually shake Russell Williams' hand, say, thank you, you're doing the right thing. Was that something that was a bit hard for you to do? Was it just in line with trying to keep the rapport and the flow of the investigation? I mean, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the rationale with that, or if it's just something that happened sort of in the flow of the moment.
That's something I always try and do. Once somebody has turned that corner and has decided to tell you the truth after hours of basically stonewalling or refusing to talk or to tell you the truth, I think if you put yourself in the shoes of the person in the room, in Russell Williams' shoes, I think once he makes that first admission, his thought process is the tone of this interview going to change now? And I think that offer of a simple handshake is simply reinforcing to somebody that you're still willing to treat them with respect, despite the fact you now know that they are a murderer, and that your goal is to continue to have an honest conversation.
Interesting. And I actually have watched other interviews that you've done in relation to this, and I believe there was about after the fact another 40 hours or so of interviewing that happened, or something. I may have been off the mark with that, but I guess an aftermath where he still was, him being Russell Williams, still adamant and wanting to share everything with you, maybe even contrary to what learned defense counsel might otherwise be saying. I'm not sure if you're able to share a little bit about that, but
I can't share too much. I can tell you that I think it's pretty clear in the interviews that are out there is that Russell Williams, despite all the horrible things he'd done, still saw himself as a man of honor, somebody who would keep his word.
Sure.
And shortly after he made his first admissions, he told us that he would provide us with all our answers. And I think that's really where the interview was helpful to the investigation. As I said a few minutes ago, if he'd refused to talk to us, those search warrants would have been executed. We know from what we found in the house that the officers, within an hour or two of going into those homes, would have found some very incriminating evidence, and he would have been arrested on that basis. But again, he considered himself to be a man of honor. Hard for some people to see him that way, but that's how he saw himself. And he made a commitment to talk to us, and he continued to do so. You're right, for several interviews after that night. Yeah. And really where that helped us, Brian, was as everybody knows now, he had broken into more than 80 homes, taken hundreds or thousands of photographs, and working through that volume of evidence. For him to sit down at his computer with us over the weeks following and walk us through those photographs and tell us what address and what date they were taken on was very helpful in terms of being able to identify all the crimes he committed.
Absolutely. And although I'm inclined to suggest maybe I'll never know for certain, I would suggest absolutely that the rapport you've undeniably built with him plausibly may have had something to do with how cooperative you want to be after the fact. And again, like I said, and not new news to you, the fact that this, absolutely masterfully done, and certainly the benchmark for training all over the globe, much like you probably are doing a lot of jet setting, doing training after the fact to that regard anyways. And I know that'll probably continue to be the tale. So maybe as a bit of a parting sentiment here, and again, I graciously appreciate you being here. I will tell you as an aside, in the interest of transparency, this for me has been about a year in the making. That's how long it took me to get the chutzpah, as my people say, to reach out and to get you to sit down with me. So I'm absolutely ecstatic, and many other my colleagues for that matter as well, to have the time with you here today. But just on the idea of now you being in the realm of honing in on your investigative training company, Integrity Interviewing for Investigators. Again, the link will be slathered all over this video. Do you have any maybe words of insight, advice, anything for, let's say, the aspiring police investigator, if you will, that that Jim Smyth's true sentiments that are proven to be relevant and true for you, that maybe you're always inclined to pass along to the younger generations?
Well, it's always bothered me when I hear an investigator who makes a comment about a potential interview say something like, "Oh, what's the point? They're not going to talk to us. They're going to call a lawyer and refuse to talk to us." And that's always very disappointing for me to hear that. And part of why we started this company was to give people the opportunity to find some meaningful training early in their career that can give them the confidence to conduct these interviews in a way that they're admissible in court, that they get truthful information from people, because that's a big part of being an investigator, is that you have that, what you can do, what you can't do, and you can work your way through having difficult conversations with people with some confidence and get some good results.
Absolutely. Excellent insight. And again, Integrity Interviewing for Investigators. Look out for the link. Retired Superintendent Jim Smyth, the one and only of the OPP. It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege. I thank you so kindly for your time. And of course, for all you out there watching, it's been a hard day for me to speak today. I need more caffeine or something. For all you watching, we appreciate you tuning in, and stay tuned for the next episode. We'll see you later.